Okay, here we are, back. The last lesson that I just went through with you guys was how to create this kind of basic UI for a calculator app, which we're going to end up taking this text box, whatever's entered in this text box here, and add it to whatever's entered in this text box here on a button click, and it'll display over here in this answer area. So we created this UI last time around just with drag and drop. We got kind of a little bit familiar with the properties over here. We renamed each of these appropriate names in the last lesson. So in Visual Studio, it's very easy for you to actually create event handlers. And in this case, we just need one event handler for this button here. We need for something to happen when this button's clicked, that it calculates those two things. So there's a couple ways you can do this. In Visual Studio, the most easy way is the default kind of event handler for a button is pressed or clicked. And so if I double click here on this button, it's going to automatically create an event handler in this kind of code behind file. And so you can see now I have two files open. I have a design view here, okay, of this form1.cs, and then I also have another file that's the code behind, and that's actually where you do all your programming and coding, is in this kind of code behind file here. Now don't worry about kind of this initialization kind of stuff that happens here. What we created there with that click was this event handler kind of portion here, okay, and it's that simple. To create an event handler for a button click, all we had to do was double click over here on that button. Okay, there's other ways you can do that. I'm just going to undo that created event handler, and you can see that's gone now in this code behind. Other ways we can do that is from the design view. If I'm clicked on top of that calculate button, I can go over here to this properties window, and if I click on this little lightning bolt here, it's the events that are available. It lists all the events that are available to a button. And so I could have mouse click, mouse down, mouse enter, mouse hover. All those kind of things could be different events, and I could control those events through here. For right now, since the default one was mouse click, and so I think, or maybe it was pressed. Either way, I can kind of key down or whatever. I'm just going to go and use the default one and see which one it creates there. Okay, and so it created a click. And so if I went back here into the properties, now you can see click was the default for button, and it's now created an event. I could have clicked right in here in this area here and created that event handler as well. It's just one of those benefits of Visual Studio, being able to do a lot of things for you just graphically rather than having to code them. Okay, and so that event handler has been created over here, and this is how we're going to basically connect that button that we created earlier to our actual code. We're going to have code within these brackets here that's actually going to do some things for us. But before we get there, the thing that I need to create from the start is I actually need to create some variables, and we're going to get into some a little bit of coding here. And for right now, we're just going to create those within this kind of this class here, and these are, we're going to make a section. Now to comment in C#, you actually have to do you type in two kind of slash lines like that, and then you can see it highlights green. When it does that, that means it's a comment. And so what I'm going to have here is what I'm going to call public variables. Okay, and what I mean by that is that those are just going to be variables that are within this class. Now because I have this comment, commented, the computer when it compiles is not going to read that. So I could type whatever I want in here. I'm just going to put the comment public variables for now, and then maybe I'll put another comment, what I have below. We'll say number variables, so I know what's going on. It's important that you start commenting your code. I know we're just starting with coding, but it's going to make your code more readable throughout. And just remember that comments are sections of code that the computer doesn't read come compile time. And so by kind of labeling things as I go through with comments, I can quickly navigate through my code and see what's happening. And so the first section, like I said, public variables, and we're going to have an integer variable, and so I'm going to go int, and I'm going to call it number 1, and then we do a semicolon to kind of finish that off in C#. So I'm initializing 2 variables, and then I'm going to go int number 2. Okay, and so these are just variable names, okay, and the int part tells me that it's an integer, okay, which is the variable type. And we're going to talk about different kinds of variables ahead, but an integer basically, for our sake, is what we learned in math. An integer is it's a number, okay, and so we're going to use number variables to kind of handle some of that stuff. So we have those kind of number variables there. Now we're going to kind of try and make them into we're going to try and convert whatever's put in that text box here. When the button's clicked, we're going to convert those number variables into whatever value's in there. And normally we'd want to do some error checking. We're going to simplify this for today. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go number 1, which we declared above, okay, equals, and what do we call that? Text number 1 dot, oh, we may have to go back, int dot parse. Now you're not going to know too much about this, but basically what that's going to do is it's going to parse, okay, or try and convert whatever's in that text box into a number for me, and then I'm just going to put in the string, which would be the value of that text box. Now I need to get the name of that text box. I think it's called text. You can see it starts to complete things for me here. A really great thing about Visual Studio is it's completing. So it's converting into an integer the value of that text. Let's start to do that. The text number 1 dot, and I'll talk about dot notation in a bit. You don't necessarily need to know everything that's going on right now. Basically, the text was the value from that text box. So that text box has different properties, and I use the dot notation that gives me a whole bunch of options of the properties. The one I want to get is its text value. Okay, and so this one line of code here basically is changing the value of this integer here, okay, or this variable integer, to whatever the value of that text box is, which is what I want to happen when I press that button calculate. Okay, I also want to be able to take that number 2, and I want number 2 to become the value of the other text box. So int dot parse, that's just basically converts a string into an integer, and we'll do text number 2, and you can see this auto completes for me here, dot text, and then I can kind of get those 2 values. Okay, so basically those couple lines of code, all they're really doing is when I click on the button when I'm in my program, it's going to add values to these 2 integers. So it's kind of linking them, and so we're kind of linking things together. And so if I was to comment this, which would probably be a wise thing to do since we're starting out, let's say what we're doing here, we're converting string values, and we'll talk about strings later, of the text boxes to integer values. Okay, which is something we have to oftentimes convert different variables from one type to another for our kind of specific uses, and that's what we're doing. Okay, and then after this, it's very simple what we're going to do from here. We're actually going to calculate. So I'm going to say calculate the sum of number 1 and number 2. I could have not had space in there, but that's okay. And so very simple what I'm going to do from here. Maybe I need a different variable called sum. I'll just add that in right now. We'll call it integer sum. I'll just declare that up there under those public variables. Okay, so I'm organizing my code, and so now I'll say sum equals number 1 plus number 2. Okay, and so I'm just adding those two values together. And that's going to be shown in this sum. Now, I've done the calculations, and so within my button click, that's all great. But from here, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to actually show that in this actually UI element called, what did I name this earlier? If I clicked on there, oh, I'm on the, you can see I'm on the events. I need to move back to the properties. And from here, I called it label answer. Okay, so when I want to display that in the answer, in the text of the answer, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to go label answer dot dot text, and you can see that that's one of my options here, equals, and we're going to say sum. And this is a cool other thing you can do here to quickly convert back into a string value is label sum to string, and then you have to do open and close parentheses. I'll talk about that later on. And that just quickly converts that that kind of number value of sum that was an integer value into a string, which in this case, okay, is the value is what that kind of property is. It's a string property of label answer. Okay, and you can see that you're probably starting to get a feel for that dot notation, a little bit of what's happening there. Okay, and that's it. It's basically, I'm going to add some numbers in there, and that's going to work. And so that's all contained within that event handler. Okay, and this is pretty simple code, but let's just kind of take a quick, I'm going to save up here, and let's see if this program is going to work for us. So I'll just hit up here, and I'm going to run my application. Just hit this kind of play button here. It says start, and let's see what we get. It's loading up. Okay, and so my application is opened up, and now if I enter in a text value, right now there's no event handlers firing. I'm just adding in text, and I'm going to just go 4 plus, I don't know, 7, so we should get an answer of 11. Okay, when I hit the calculate button, okay, I can see that my answer turned to 11. And I could just kind of repeat this with 5, and I don't know, 234, hit calculate. It's going to do that quick, simple math for me. Okay, now one thing that I haven't added in here, I haven't made my text boxes so that they are either solely only accepting numbers, or I haven't had it handled any errors either. If I put in, for example, a letter here, and I hit calculate, I'm probably going to throw an exception or an error, or I'm just not going to, there we go. And you can see I've thrown an exception here, and so I haven't handled that error in my code yet. But we're not going to do that at this stage, so I'm just going to stop my program. I realize there's an exception here, and I would have to eventually handle that. But that's a little bit more in depth for what this lesson's kind of covering. So I basically just wanted to show you how to kind of get a UI together, link it with an event handler, which is right here, and start kind of getting a feel for a little bit of the code, understanding what kind of variables are, understanding that we can do some basic math once we've initialized those values as well. Okay, so fairly straightforward. I could add in any operation here mathematically, and it would change what it's doing. But that's kind of this basic tutorial. So next time around, we're going to probably get into some kind of more complicated ways that we can take a look at problems that we can solve with computer programming, and kind of get beyond this basic stuff. Anyways, hopefully you learned something from this, and see you next time.